even with celiac disease, it's a line in the sand where you have to go forward. And sometimes you can lose who you are or wonder who you are. So it's a lot of storytelling, because I call myself a storyteller. I share personal stories, and then how I went through my own journey of getting my spark back, and kind of with the inspiration of like, you know what, you really can do this. And when you live like aligned with who you are, it makes the tough moments, it's easier to get through them, and it opens up doors to opportunity.
So guys, I have a very special guest today. Her name is Rachel, and she does findingjoy.net. But I think most importantly to us, to my community, why I was so excited to have her on is she has been through it with a gluten-free living. Her son was diagnosed in January 2011, it was, with celiac disease. And as you guys know, autoimmune diseases in general are near and dear to my heart. But I think through story and through life experiences is where we get the gems of how we can implement new ideas and really just kind of lean into other people's experiences, right? What they've gone through and what they've learned in the process. So I wanted to bring Rachel on because she's got so much to share that I think is going to impact this community. Rachel, thank you so much for being with us here today. And my whole community is super fired up to have us have this conversation.
I am super honored to be here. So thank you. And I'm excited about this conversation too.
We were talking a little bit off before we jumped on camera, and we started going, and everybody says, no, turn the camera on. Because I think a lot of the discussions that we want to have are things that are impacting a lot of people. So tell me a little bit about how, were you already living a gluten-free lifestyle? Were you raised, around this concept? Had you had a lot of knowledge about autoimmune disorders? Like, how did this all happen in your world?
I would say I was a rookie with it. I knew of autoimmunes. I have a friend that has type 1 diabetes, and I kind of knew it. But my son, Samuel, who has celiac, he was diagnosed when he was 16 months old.
Wow.
And he was my seventh child. So I understood little kids at that point. And there was just something that wasn't right with him. I could just tell, he just had a lot of immune issues, and he was great up until a certain point, until he was about, I'd say 10, 12 months old. And then all of a sudden he got really sick. And I think backwards, like that was the trigger. And when he was diagnosed, I knew of celiac disease. I knew of gluten-free because I love to shop at Whole Foods and a lot of those. That was my world, but it wasn't completely my world. I had done elimination diets before, but never elimination lifestyle.
So it's from like an interest, but not like a medical necessity.
Exactly. Exactly. I'd see my naturopath, we would test, and she would be like, you should probably go off wheat, or you should go off dairy. And I would do it for a while. And then I'd always kind of trickle back in. And it's amazing when it becomes life or death. Like, there never was a moment where I thought, maybe we should cheat a little bit, because it was the line was not fuzzy. It was black and white. That was what it was.
That is really, really young to get a diagnosis of celiac. How did you guys come about getting that diagnosis?
It took a lot of me being an advocate. That is part of the reason.
Had you breastfed at that point?
I did, exclusively. And actually, that was kind of one of the hints to me as a parent that something was going on, because he was 16 months old and all my other kids, they naturally weaned themselves. Right. And all of a sudden he had an uptick. And I thought, well, this is really strange. And we had introduced foods to him right about the time when he started getting sick, but not knowing that what I was feeding him was actually harming his gut.
So the reason why I asked you that was I had a client that the only other kid that are pediatric that we were able to get an early diagnosis like that was a mom that was nursing. And as they started introducing food, she said, and he was sick and ear infected. It's just over and over. And none of her other kids had that. She'd not had that experience with her kids. She'd had 3 previously. You have a master's in raising children and a PhD. I've just decided, honorary.
Thank you.
Yes. But it was, and then she said there's this ravenous uptick in nursing. And that was the one that I just went, wait a minute, there's something with the glycoproteins, there's something with the immunoglobulins, there's something going on for an immune modulation. It has to be, right? Because why would the kid, enjoying food, but just, rosy cheeks and stuff. So what kinds of symptoms was he having?
He couldn't use the bathroom. It was excruciating. And it was he presented atypically because there wasn't vomiting. There wasn't any of that. It was just screaming and a lot of pain. He was just in so much pain. But the end symptoms were, it was like friends would say to me, something's wrong. And he was lethargic as all get out. Now you picture a toddler, they have all this energy, and
right.
He would just lay on the ground. He didn't even want to, he didn't want to get up. He'd wake up at 7, go to sleep at 9 in the morning. And it was friends that were like, something is up. And when you live with them all the time, you just kind of go, I don't know, even though, and this friend of mine, her father-in-law was an emergency room doctor. And she said, could I ask him? And he was the one that threw out celiac disease and a couple other things and contacted us with another doctor where I lived who said, you need to take him to the children's hospital immediately.
Very cool. Did he have the dark circles or the thicker eyelashes? Did he have
the sunken eyes? Like I look back at the pictures and I'm like, oh, how did I not see? Like I had that wrestling, but it was definitely just very sunken and dark. And I would say the biggest thing for me was the life was out of his eyes. Right. And as his gut healed, it was like they just became brighter and brighter and brighter.
Hi, it's Haylie, your host. I know firsthand what it feels like to find real impactful solutions to your struggles. And I know what it feels like to lose hope. We are being bombarded by toxins every single day. As a matter of fact, the world's largest single environmental health risk is air pollution. One thing that is becoming crystal clear is that environmental toxic burdens in our bodies must be addressed. Let me help you tackle toxic burden. Go to HayliePomroy.com/detox and download my free Detox Decoded Masterclass. Let's give you a fighting chance. I know what it feels like to lose hope, whether you're dealing with fatigue, mast cell activation, an autoimmune disorder, long COVID, viral reactivation, anxiety or depression, or inflammation. All of it can feel overwhelming. I will teach you nutrition and natural therapies to help your body eliminate toxins. I cannot wait to see you there. Again, that's HayliePomroy.com/detox.
Oh, I'm so glad you got such an early diagnosis. I had a set of twins that came in, was referred by a dietitian from Children's, and it was for nutritional consulting. And, I was kind of like, I think we missed, Mom's doing a pretty good job. I think we missed something here. And I'm so happy. So you took gluten-free living to a new extreme in your family, correct?
Mm-hmm. I did.
And you know what, I think, so 2011, I was trying to think, I had been practicing for, let's see, maybe 10 or something years at that point. But there wasn't the accessibility at that point to as many gluten-free products. How did you navigate that early on?
So there wasn't. I always joke that the bread back then could hold the door open because it was so dense.
You could build a house. Yeah,
you could. I remember being in the hospital with him, and they brought me this piece of gluten-free bread, and I thought, this is our world now. What has happened?
And you were at Children's in what state?
Minneapolis, in Minnesota.
Now we'll get on those doctors. I'm very proud of them for not for taking that so seriously. We have adults that are getting diagnosed with celiac, and their doctors are going, a little often. I genuinely had a client that shared with me that they did not even classify it as an autoimmune disorder in their diagnostic code. I know, where we're like, what?
Yeah, I just think there's so much misinformation about it. That's the thing. I tell people, prior to him getting diagnosed, they did all the RAST tests.
Yeah.
And he came back not allergic to wheat. And I tell people that all the time. And the people that don't know are like, what? I'm like, he's not allergic to wheat. He's got an issue with the gluten, the protein that causes the problems. But if I had just accepted those initial tests as, okay, we're good to go, I just don't know. I think that when I look back, he was on such a downward spiral, and he had lost 2.5, maybe 3 pounds in like 3 weeks. And this is a toddler. And it even with all of that, it did take a lot of like insisting, like, please, can you run this test? And it's a lab test. That's why I'm like, it's just the screening test. It's so simple.
So he was positive in a blood test.
He was in the test that they did in 2011. His TTG gliadin, I believe, was elevated. And then they did a biopsy.
Okay. I was going to ask you if they went on and did a biopsy. You can have a false negative in the serum testing. And so we've had people that, came back and said, no, my doc said I'm not celiac. They run the blood test, but they don't do the biopsy. And then, same thing. I love what you said is the RAS testing, the food allergy testing. People will come back negative for wheat. You need to check the autoantibody or the immune response to it. And there's different immunoglobulins, right? We have IgG, IgE, different ways in which the body, and with celiac specifically having an autoantibody, right? They did. I'm just really excited. So I'm very proud. I just have so many people that don't get great testing. So good job, Mama, on insisting, and good job for the team that you brought in. Do you ever feel frustrated? Do you ever have the situation, and our communities shared this a lot, where people try to maybe give your son a treat because you're so restrictive, or like, oh, you can have that pizza, it's just every once in a while. Do you ever have that in your space?
We do. I would say a couple things. One thing is gluten-free is kind of the butt of jokes, which always I'm like, you guys, let's not do that. Like I see it on TV, like it's annoying, all of that.
In movies right now. Yeah.
Right. Yep. And I see that. But I would say that for my son Samuel, he's the strongest advocate for himself. I mean, he'll get asked and he'll say no, or I've raised him so that I don't have to always be the one checking, so that now that when he's 14, I can say, yeah, go hang out with your friends, and trust him to make a good decision. Right. And he actually knows, like if he gets gluten, his main issue is fatigue. And like you can instantly tell, like, okay, somewhere it came in.
I think even, what you said about butt of the jokes, and I've seen it in movies and stuff lately where they're like, oh, it's gluten-free. Or we were traveling with someone at a sporting event, and they ordered a hot dog, right? Mm-hmm. And it was a hot dog that brand is gluten-free, but there was a bun on it. And they said,
right,
I can't have the bun. And they said, well, just take the bun off. And, it's heated and steamed all over the hot dog. And I went back and I said, no. Give me one without a bun. Like, come on. This isn't a preference or I mean, even if it is a preference, but in this situation, it's not a preference. It's an autoimmune disorder, and it can be really serious business, because the fatigue and lethargy is the symptom of the immune system attacking itself. Right. So people can even feel like sometimes the symptoms are somewhat benign in celiac, right? Like, oh, you're a little tired, so get a little extra rest. But it's actually a dysregulation in the autonomic nervous system. I mean, it's a big deal with autoimmune-based people being tired. It's a big signal or symptom. You have some, well, first of all, a couple things. One, I'm really excited because you have a book coming out, and I think it's going to be a great tool guide for a lot of us in the autoimmune space, but also moms and parents and family members that have family members. Can you tell me a little bit about that book? Tell me the name, tell me where we get it, all of that good stuff.
All right. So it's called Get Your Spark Back, and it's the answer to the number one question I get on my site. Well, how do I get my spark back? Specifically because most of us have this moment in life where life doesn't look like what we thought it would look like. I tell people, nobody puts in their yearbook, you know, it'd be great when I'm 40, I'm going to go through a divorce. Like, we have these moments, or even with celiac disease, it's a line in the sand where you have to go forward. And sometimes you can lose who you are or wonder who you are. So it's a lot of storytelling, because I call myself a storyteller. I share personal stories, and then how I went through my own journey of getting my spark back, and kind of with the inspiration of like, you know what, you really can do this. And when you live like aligned with who you are, it makes the tough moments, it's easier to get through them, and it opens up doors to opportunity.
Right. I love that. And in our community, you know, we want you to be outrageously healthy. We want you to have an abundance of energy. And if you don't, we want to lean into the why first. And, you know, we believe you. We know that food is medicine. We use nutrition as medicine. We support the body in a natural, you know, holistic perspective, right? But I think getting your spark back is, we create this thing called a health wish list, right? And we say dream big. But I think that some people feel like it's lost, and it's lost forever. Mm-hmm. What do you say to those people? Like, I've aged, I'm older, I've gone through menopause. Spark. I took us. Yeah.
That's so great. I have those questions, because one of the questions is in the book that it's like, what if I'm too old? Or what if it's too late? Or what if I don't have the resources? And I really believe that as long as I'm on this earthly planet, and anybody else is, that your soul is really the ember of that. And when you breathe in, you've got it right there, and it's your job to nurture it. It's your job to find it, figure it out, and to believe that it's there, and to breathe life back into it. And the more that you do, it's like, you know, with fire, you blow on it and it grows and it grows. And I've felt like, do I even have it anymore? And everybody that I've worked with and everybody that I share this with, you know, they just want it back, and you can get it.
Yeah, you can. And it's the fact that you don't have it is just your amazing, brilliant body communicating to you. So don't ignore it. Don't shut it down. Believe it, and ask it, like, what can we infuse you with? How can we support you? How can we feed you, right? How can we emotionally, physically, supplementally, nutritionally, how can we feed you back to that place? Because you have so many life experiences with this, our community wanted to know, like, do you have tips for eating out? Like, do you use gluten swabs at a restaurant? Do you give people a card? I mean, I've had people tell me all kinds of things. Do you communicate directly with the server? Do you ever have them go back and ask people at a restaurant? What's the best way for eating out and advocating?
I would say all of the above with that. I would say I do my research. Yep. Right. I do the research. I'm always approaching it with grace and kindness. Like, sometimes people can be like, what? And if I'm a little bit cranky back and assuming they know, then it creates that kind of polarization. Whereas if I'm just asking the question, and so we do ask questions, sometimes the chef will come out, which I love. And now it's to the point where, like I said, with my son, where he's observed it. Now he'll be the one that he'll say, you know, I have celiac disease. Do you have a different menu for that? And then he'll ask the questions. Is it a dedicated fryer? Like, he's just learned, and that's just part of his story. And I think that the more you just ask the questions, and the more willing you are to adapt, the easier it is. I always say that one of the greatest lessons that Samuel ever taught me was when he was really young, maybe 4 or 5, and there was this giant table of cookies, and they're all gluten. And I remember like feeling so sad because he couldn't have any. And somebody came out with a box of, not very good back then, snickerdoodles, and he was thrilled. He was like, it was the greatest moment in the world that he got his own cookies. And for me, it was him that he looked for. He didn't spend time looking at what he couldn't have. He was really grateful for everything he could.
Right. I love that. We were talking earlier about processed and packaged foods. So I thought it was really cute. There was this, it was at this farmer's market. I was traveling. I think I can't remember if I was in Florida or Colorado at the time, but I went to this farmer's market, and they had labeled all of their fruits and vegetables gluten-free.
Oh, that's so cute.
I know. And I thought it was really, packaged by nature, 100% gluten-free. And I just, it kind of shook me for a minute because I thought, okay, if we focus on whole real foods, like it's a lot easier for us to ensure that it's gluten-free, right? Now, not if we're having, pastas or things of that nature. But in a lot of now that gluten-free has become more commercial, right? I'll use that instead of the word popular, more commercial. Are you feeling, I feel like, and I don't know if you feel like so much of these packaged foods to make them taste palatable have so much junk in them?
I would agree. I would say that old rule that I remember hearing 20 years ago, shop the perimeter, still exists if I go to the store. I know that, there are treats that are there. And I'm going to tell you from a mom perspective, sometimes I'm really grateful for that because my biggest concern when he was really young was he's just never going to experience and never going to fit in. Does it mean that we have them all the time? No, but it also means that there's an option there for like when he goes out with something with his friends where he can experience that, which I thought he wasn't going to have.
Right.
But yeah, most gluten-free stuff, especially, even 5 years ago, I think the number one ingredient was sugar. Right. To look back at it.
Right. And a lot of soy oftentimes, and a lot of corn, processed corn products too, which always kind of bum me out a little bit when we're trying to grow healthy guts and healthy bodies. And I think the one thing, because of where celiac affects, every autoimmune disorder affects a different aspect of the body, right?
Right.
And some it's multi-targeted, like lupus, but like Hashimoto's thyroiditis will affect the hormones of the thyroid or the thyroid gland itself. I have ITP, it affects specifically the platelets. But celiac is a little bit multi-directional, but the gut is impacted so much with celiac. How do you communicate? And early on, how did you communicate? Because like a lot of people in our community, they're having a hard time telling like their friends and family members. How did you communicate the importance of this without making your child sound fragile? Because I think you've done a hell of a job in empowering your kid, but also making this not be, I'm weak because of this, but this is a dynamic of my body and I'm not planning on being weak. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I would agree. I struggle with the word disease after it sometimes too, because I think disease makes it feel weak. Like, oh, you have a disease. Like versus, you know what, I can't eat gluten. That's just the way it is. I really think that because he was so sick and he was in and out of the hospital a lot when he was first diagnosed. And I think 100, 200 years ago, if nothing had changed, he wouldn't have survived. I think he was that ill. I think a lot of the family and friends witnessed that. So I didn't have to be like, they would just remember. Do you remember? When he started school, I was a super strong advocate. I would meet with the nurse. I'd meet with the school. He had a 504. So like his classroom was gluten-free. They would bring in whatever gluten-free Play-Doh the teacher would call. And it was just the way it needed to be. I didn't want to make a fuss about it. So like if there was a birthday party and I love the schools that will be like, just give out pencils or something. But back when they would bring treats, they'd let me know. And I was ready to go. This is the way it is. And I told him, he just doesn't have to be apologizing. This is just your life. This is just the way it is. Just be grateful for what you can have. And half the time, if there is treats, he's like, I don't really want any. Because I think he's grown up without that pastry, that whole flavor profile.
Refined, yeah.
And so he's just
That's interesting. I love that you brought up the issue of a 504 because I don't think a lot of people would have thought about that. Can you explain what a 504 is?
So the school has to make accommodations for him is really what it is. I didn't want it. I needed to know that he was safe at school. Especially when he was younger, because when he was 4, he had gotten influenza, was in the hospital for a week, and I knew his immune system wasn't as strong. And the 504 is just basically a protection measure for him, so that his classroom can be modified in a way where his education doesn't have to suffer because he can't do the project that what they're doing. Because especially little kids, they do tons of projects with wheat. Let's build gingerbread houses. Let's do stuff with pretzels. Let's do all of this. And if that was just the way it was, I didn't want him to feel isolated. I also wanted him to be able to sit I didn't want him to have to be isolated to a lunch.
Yes.
I wanted him to sit with the other kids. And no, I can't trade. To develop that voice for himself. Nope, I'm good to go.
I think a 504 can also really help the teacher too.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's not a muddy water that they're navigating. It just is, like you said.
Right.
And so in our community, I want to go back to the book for a second, getting your spark back. So that's our whole mission, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that individuals can be outrageously healthy and that they can get their spark back. We start by doing some self-identification, like, self-assessments, like where are you? What's going on right now? And having like a safe space where you can just like the good, the bad, and the ugly, let's talk about it. And then creating kind of that health wish list, aim higher. We even take people through the process of filling out a request for care. Like, how do you ask a school or a healthcare practitioner? Like, how do you advocate for yourself in a way that isn't necessarily going to drive the issue down their throat, but it's going to make it very easy? I always say, like, we want to make a yes easy. We want to make a yes easy and tangible. And then, like in all of our food prescriptions, we identify, we combine those together. Like, where is the quickest way we can get you to where you're at, to where you can dream or envision being. And so we have a lot of different nutrition programs and supplementation and success boosters and life modifications and stuff like that. And then we kind of track that from a protocol to progress. But I will say, like in all of my health and wellness programs, we have 18 in general, and then they all have nuances depending on the person. Gluten's not in any one of them. Mm-hmm. And it's not because I think the entire population has celiac by any stretch of the imagination, but it's because it's a very unique glycoprotein that mimics our immune adaptation or our adaptive hormones, our adrenal hormones, our fight and flight, our stress hormones. And so I think sometimes when we have an autoimmune disorder in general, but when we have celiac specifically, I think a lot of people that like you said, the fatigue, right? On the other end of it, as adults, a lot of times we see a lot of anxiety, foggy brain, confusion, those types of symptoms. And it's that adaptive immune modulation. A lot of times we do food rotation in general. Do you guys implement any of that to help stimulate the gut microbiome in your family?
I would say we don't. Food rotation, just in general, I think that's just the way that our family lives. I couldn't handle the same thing all the time anyway, so that's like a great way. One of the things you and I had talked about prior was fermented foods, and I'm going to tell you, this family loves kimchi like you wouldn't believe. Although I tell you, maybe open it up outside sometimes, but we do love all of that whole fermented world. But I think my kids like it because they grew up with it. I introduced it when they were young. I didn't, and so it's just kind of part of who we are.
That's good. That's great. And that prebiotic, that re-inoculating or feeding the gut bugs, that's in that fermented prebiotic piece. And then in the probiotic piece, making sure that you have the good gut bug. And I love that you guys rotate foods. There's a lot of studies on the gut microbiome. And one of the things that's so important is that you don't eat the same thing day in and day out. It secretes new enzymes. It secretes new culture when you have that variety of foods. How do people find your book?
They can find my book on Amazon, Books A Million, Barnes & Noble, or even on my website, findingjoy.net.
That's awesome. What do you, kind of reflecting back on this, what are some of the things that you find joy in?
The really simple things in life. Honestly, that's what I've learned. It's the perfect sunrise. It's time laughing with my kids. For me, it's knowing that just providing hope for others in their own journey. I think that's a really powerful moment in life, when that's the thing about your spark, is it spreads with other people, and that makes me find joy, really. I'm very grateful to be given the opportunity to be that voice in this world. And what's interesting about that is, if you're talking about my own spark, that's what lights me up the most a lot of times, is that moment of like, you can do this. And it just keeps going.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, I hear you and I feel that too. It's I don't know, I just remember for me I was in my 20s, 19 when I first was primarily diagnosed, but my 20s when it all kind of came crashing down and I had to deal with it. And I remember that moment and I remember that feeling. And then I remember the shift, which was like, I don't want anybody else to feel this way. Mm-hmm. And for me, it was like the feeling alone in your health journey and the not having answers and not having a good, I guess, roadmap for what to do next, right? The options laid out for me were not an option. I guess I'll say it that way. And so the fulfillment, I the other day I flew in, my flight was delayed, and I walked in the door and my son gave me headphones and said, I flew in from an international flight. Mm-hmm. And he said, you teach in 7 minutes. And I was like, cool, bring it on. Because, yeah. Right. Now,
I love that.
Even if he would have said, you've got to go, win an award in 7 minutes, I'd have said, cancel it. If he would have said, you're going to, I don't know, get to go to the movies or a sporting event in 7 minutes, I'd have said, forget it. Mm-hmm. But, I threw my hair up in a clip and I was so fired up because I knew who was on the other end and I knew what they were going through. And I knew that somewhere in my own journey, I had picked up some gems that would have shortened my trajectory, right, from health crisis to health victory. And I couldn't wait to share them. I couldn't wait to give a ladder, give a bridge, give all the things. And then also I learn from everybody's experience because it's
absolutely,
it's so dynamic. Yeah. So because as a community, we don't incorporate gluten in any of our food programs, we just kind of leave wheat out for a lot of reasons, the genetic modification, the glycoprotein that's, pro-inflammatory, the fact that, I have a soil agriculture and soil sciences background. So I have a farm myself.
That's fascinating. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. I have an 80-acre ranch and I raise cattle and I also raise heirloom grass. So heirloom seeds and stuff. So I really studied a lot about kind of how we've adulterated that as a group in general. But what would be the number one tip, like in preparing foods, in preparing the lifestyle? Like, how do you make your own pasta? Do you just try brands until you fall in love with something? How do people still have foods that would maybe breads and pastas? That's the one where people say, did you just start like making stuff? Did you just start trying stuff? Like, how can they still have the joy of maybe feeling that pasta experience in their lives?
I really think it's trial and error. The pasta now compared to 10 years ago, 12 years ago, it's night and day different. But you have to read labels and it depends upon what you're going to use it for. If it's going to be like a cold noodle salad, there's some brands that work better than other brands. It's kind of understanding the nuances and being okay with the flops. Like the first year, Christmas cookies.
I love that. No, yeah. I being okay with the flops because I think people get so defeated and then they go forget it.
Oh no, yeah, okay. It's okay, and you can have good things. That's what I was going to say. The first Christmas cookies were a huge thing in my family. And first year I tried to make them gluten-free. I remember the pan, they all melted together. I was like, what is this? But now I can make my grandmother's famous Moravian gingerbread cookies and people taste them and they never know. Is it gluten-free? They don't know. So
that's awesome. I love that. My friend Jack always says, fail faster. Yeah. Get the failure out of the way. Fail faster. So I like that. Be okay with the flops. Because it happens, but it happens in any aspect of cooking and preparing. And I love that there's networks out there. I know you write a lot of blog posts and you post a lot of really cool things about different brands and different successes that you have with cooking. And so I know our community is going to really lean into that. So I think we're very aligned with having people, I use the word outrageously healthy, having your spark. Right, finding that joy. I think it's. I love your perspective too about it is what it is. Right? We talk a lot in our community about kind of fear of the flare. What happens when you get into something that is maybe a trigger. You have talked about some life lessons from being on a gluten-free path. key lessons that you learned from, managing kind of your son's exposure, but what kinds of life lessons has that brought to the forefront that can apply outwardly?
The first one is to appreciate what you can have, which I shared a little earlier. That's huge to me. Another one is, for me, I come in with, like, back to when he was in school, I wanted to come in and help. I didn't expect them to have all the answers and for me to do nothing. I just want to be that advocate, that voice for, you can live this way and life can be wonderful. It can be amazing. It's just that perspective. The other thing is a life lesson for me is, I remember thinking about it way when he was diagnosed, but there hasn't been a day in the last 14 years where I haven't thought about gluten every single day. And that's okay. You just think, like, does this have gluten-free? Or you just check and it's okay. And then the last one was inspired by something you said, but one of my favorite quotes is, fall 7 times, stand up 8. And I love it because it doesn't say fall once, figure it out. It's implied you're going to fall, but the power is in that standing up again, because you figure out, oh, maybe that's why I fell. I'm not going to do that. You learn from every time. And I think that, to me, is the biggest life lesson.
I love that. We a lot of times, because my food philosophy is focus on what to eat to heal the metabolism. Don't focus on what not to eat. Focus on what to eat. And I think that so many times we get focused on what we can't have instead of leaning into what we can have. So that appreciation and that value, but also, like you said, take an active role in your health and wellness. And when it's your kid, you have to be that advocate. But it sounds like he's starting to step into taking that self-advocacy. And my daughter and my son, I mean, they can read labels like nobody's business. They can also whip up and prepare foods. And when we went to Italy, we did cooking classes. And I said, okay, yeah, but I wanted, like, so the country that, feeds you pasta, right?
Right.
I said, okay, how can we, and we learned all Italian foods that didn't have wheat in them. And it was
fabulous.
Yeah, it was so cool because it was not focusing on, let's go make some stuff that we're going to cheat and eat or whatever, but that was something that we could actually have. And again, for me, there's a lot of different immune triggers. Soy being one, wheat being one, corn being one. For me, was understanding, like, my immune system and why it was having a negative interaction with those things, or how those things interacted with me negatively, that I made peace with the fact that, just like you said, there's not a day that goes by that's not a conversation, which is interesting because it's not like, because I also don't smoke, right?
Right.
But I don't go every day. I don't wake up and go, now I'm not going to smoke today because it's bad for me. Right. But I think that collectively, maybe we've said smoking's not so great if we're trying to get healthy, so it's easier to kind of set it aside. And that I think some of the food group, I'm going to use misinformation, but some of the food group information about, grains, and I'm a big grain advocate personally. I love complex carbohydrates for your health and wellness. But that's one that's got an autoimmune kind of trigger. So I love what you just said about that. I know that our community is going to have tons of questions. Tell me your website one more time.
It's findingjoy.net.
Okay, findingjoy.net. They're going to have tons of questions after this, because when someone touches on a subject that impacts them so much, they always do. So please promise me you'll come back.
I would love to. I feel like we've just hinted at the tip of the iceberg. When you were talking about the food thing, I think part of the reason we think about gluten is we live in an environment where it's normal. It's it's around us. And I always think back to one of the seasons on that show, Survivor, where one of the contestants who had undiagnosed celiac goes on it. All of that leaves her system. She feels great while she's there, and then figures it out. I just think we think about it because you can't walk into Kroger and it's right there. But every day.
You know what you just said? It's not only all around us, it's in all the things that are supposed to be fun. Right? It's birthday cakes. It's in the ice cream cones. It's in the donuts. It's in the pizza. Yeah. So it's not like I said, I don't think about not smoking because it has a negative connotation.
Right.
footloose and fancy free, packaged foods, right? Like it's quick, it's on the go, it's microwavable. All of those things that are supposed to make our lives better are just covered in, it's gooey, it's sticky, it's stretchy. We glutenize our bread so that it's more stretchy and, and it just, you just pull in the cheese so all of that positive, like the joy of food, the joy of expressing and celebratory piece of it is laden with gluten. So I think that's also some of the hardship that people feel, or some of the grieving that people feel when that comes out of their diet.
Right, because they probably hear other people say, oh, I could never do that. Never.
We used to early, back in the olden days when I started practicing and I would come into work in horse and buggy, we used to have to order our bread and our croutons online. Like you couldn't even get them in a store. There was some fabulous companies. Yeah.
I remember. I remember. And I remember having to make bread with like 6 different things, trying to figure it out. And then it was a flop.
Oh yeah. It did raised like this.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Or I've made some, but I do think, I will say there's some good things that are going on with social media, with people being kind, with people like yourselves getting the word out, going through it. And you could have had just a tremendous health victory in your own family and never for a moment shared your spark with the rest of us. So I just want to thank you so much, because through what you've navigated, just like what we try to do in our world, you will give us tools and resources, right, to a better, healthier. So every day, I'm breathing every day. I'm here to tell our community that you can be healthier tomorrow. Age is not getting in the way of a positive health trajectory. And I think leaning into people who are willing to share their struggles, sometimes scary, share their struggles and share their light is how we can uplift us all to a better health.
Absolutely. I agree with you completely.
Well, it's so awesome to have you. I know our community is going to just absolutely fall in love. So go grab her book, jump on the website. She's got a ton of resources for you guys, for all of our community. She had to jump into the gluten-free lifestyle. And because of that, we get to take advantage of all that you've learned. And so I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
I will talk to you soon.